I am the director of the Northwest Skills Development Network, and it is my pleasure to be here in the latest of a number of these events that we've been running to try and help people understand a little bit about what it means to be an assessor and what it is that we're looking for when we're doing our assessments. I am delighted this afternoon to be joined by some colleagues. Always very grateful on Teams calls when I see that the people who are speaking have turned up. So it's great to see Sonia and colleague on the call. Hi, Sonia. And I can see Jane as well. I'm hoping that Daryl is somewhere on the line. I can't see him at the moment, but I'm sure he'll join us in due course if he's not yet with us. So thanks very much for joining us. What we're going to do today is, as you've probably seen from the agenda, Sonia and Jane are going to talk a little bit, give a bit of a case study into Bedfordshire Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust and their assessment process. We'll do a little bit around what we're looking for in an assessor. That tends not to take too long. I'm hoping we can then build a break in at some point before we move on to a little bit from me around what the actual process of being an assessor involves, and then Daryl will talk to us about the benefits of being an assessor. I will make my usual promise, which is that we will be finished by 4 o'clock. I know that finishing late is never good at anybody's books, and if Daryl talks too much, I'll just cut him off and we'll finish by 4 o'clock. So that promise will be maintained, I assure you. So without any further ado, Sonia, I understand from Jane that you're going to do the initial presentation, and Jane's going to join you later on to say a few words as you get towards the end of the presentation. So if you want to introduce yourself, and over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sonia Carey. I'm one of the finance business partners at Bedfordshire Hospitals, and I've got Jonathan on the call, and I think I saw Aisha somewhere. Yeah, Aisha's with us as well. So I don't know whether Natasha, is Natasha on the call? Is she sharing or am I sharing?
So Natasha's not on the call. If you can share, Sonia, that'd be easy. Becky is with us, but if you could share, that might be easier.
Have a look.
You can also, you've got plenty of lifts in the main block ward there.
Oh, yeah, got major problems with the lifts. So can you see my slide now?
We can, but it's not in, it's in presenter mode rather than being in full screen mode.
Very weird. IT support by the side of me. There we go.
There you go. There you go. We've got it now. Thank you.
So I can't see you. So so that's who we are. So we Bedford Hospital and Luton and Dunstable merged April 2021, and I'd worked with David actually, and we were about to put our level 1 submission in just as we merged. So I was very familiar with the framework when we started. Got lots of involvement in One NHS Finance, locally, regionally and nationally myself. So I knew that there was lots of benefits of achieving the accreditation. We decided that we wanted to I decided I wanted to proceed with our level 1, and we, as I say, we merged. We were then awarded our level 1 in January 2022. So I knew the framework, but we just took it forward as a merged organisation. And then last year there was lots of talk about level 2, and initially we decided we were going to aim for the August submission, but that was coming at us too quickly. So we went for Christmas 2023. So that was us getting, or a small group of us getting our level 1. So what did we learn from this? And what's important to know? It's really key that there is senior support. It makes it much easier to get staff involved if our senior team want this as much as we wanted it. And it's actually much easier to access organisational information such as ED&I, culture and OD strategy, because our director of finance or our deputy director can go to these people, our other executive leads, and get some of this information on our behalf. We knew that we weren't perfect, but we had lots of good foundations to build upon. I knew that one person couldn't do it alone. So I sent an all-staff email to those who would be interested in being involved, and Jonathan and Aisha, who are on the call, stepped forward and offered to give some time. And there was a few others as well, and we formed a small group, and we were all in the same position. We all knew that we wanted to achieve our level 2 and build upon our level 1. If my 2 colleagues want to jump in anytime, that's absolutely fine. A number of us attended a similar session to this, and we found it really helpful. Other people spoke, so we knew what was expected of us. We also attended our assessor training, so we had an insight into what to expect from our assessors. Following the session, I felt that it was maybe a bit too soon and we weren't ready, and I had a real wobble at that stage. And I actually turned to Jonathan's in the room with me. I actually turned to Jonathan at the time and said, I can't do this. We're nowhere near ready. But with a bit of talking and a bit of understanding as to who was going to be helping, we decided we were going to move forward. I would urge anybody who's going through this to read the guidance document on the One NHS Finance website. That is crucial. It's got lots of information in there. It's got when to contact One NHS Finance. It's got the deadlines, the timescales, and the questions, crucially, that are going to be asked to your budget managers and your senior team. So the next point, check, know your deadlines for submission and that you're using the most up-to-date template. We had our initial feedback with our assessor, and there was a whole section that was missing, which wasn't appearing on our template, and it sent us into a bit of a spin at the time, because it was a crucial section. It was either make or break if we didn't have an answer to that. Agree realistic timescales with your assessors. What we learned is we are all still doing our day job whilst completing the template, and it does take some time, and you do need to have some time carved out of your day. So just be totally realistic. I can't see anybody. I've just got the slides in front of me. So if anybody has put their hand up, I can't see. So you might have to shout at me.
Sonia, I'll let you know if anybody does. There's no hands at the moment, though.
Okay, fine. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking, David. Our journey towards level 2. So the model that we used was for me to lead and complete the template, and then asking others to provide evidence or using their connections. So the financial management team are really key to this, because they know a lot of the managers and the budget managers that they deal with to get a lot of the information that we needed. So that was really helpful. Have someone read through your narrative and sense check, because whilst I can merrily type the narrative in and say we do this and why we do that, Jonathan was my reader, and he was going through it and saying, you need to give a bit more information on this, you need to explain this a bit more, or shall we include this? So that was really good for me. We discussed level 2 accreditation, or the accreditation process, at pretty much every meeting, every senior meeting, every departmental meeting, so that all staff knew what the timeframes are, what the expectations were, and gave all the staff a progress update. So what was missing, what key pieces of information were we missing, and could anybody else help? In most of the cases, we were doing what the criteria was asking for. It was just finding something that we could evidence. And once you get into the midst of it, you kind of lose. I lost my way a little bit, and I was going, I've got no evidence for this. I don't know what we're doing. So again, it was the team and my colleagues that came back and said, can we use X, Y, and Z? And I think Jane's going to go through some of that in her presentation. So that more often than not, there was something there. I was just not seeing it from where I was sitting. And what I would say is chunk the criteria, if I can say it, rather than looking at it as a whole. It's much more manageable. It's not so overwhelming, and there is a lot of evidence that you're going to need. But if you do it in chunks, then you can get through it. I make it sound as though it's awful, but it wasn't. So the evidence that was supplied for level 2, the snipping tool is brilliant for this. So there was lots of copies of emails showing us sharing information. There was lots of case studies, photos, notice boards, photos of notice boards, photos to show that we've attended events, away day invites, lots of certificates. And at this stage, we could actually speak to all the rest of the staff within the team and get them really involved. So asking them whether they'd attended or what they'd attended, had they got certificates, health and wellbeing events. Aisha was on the call. She actually arranged some of those, so she was able to send me things from her side. New starters, we could include them because they'd got the new starter pack. So all of a sudden you were pulling in pretty much most of the finance team. Under personal development, again, appraisal policy, appraisal documents. You can upload all of these onto the Teams channel, so it's all safe. If you want to anonymise it, you can do. Screenshots of PDPs. So I was approaching people who generally, I would say, probably don't get involved in a lot of this this type of stuff, but they were more than happy to provide me with their information. People that had participated in the Career Shaper programme or the sponsorship programme, and they were providing me with the agendas of where they attended the programmes, but it was also opening up conversations as to what they found useful and why they went in the first place. So that was another conversation that built upon the initial evidence that I needed. Professional lead development. So these are all the criteria. I didn't make that clear, but I'm assuming that most of you would know that. Examples of staff shadowing others. A lot of it was narrative, but we could then get paragraphs or some narrative from those that had shadowed to say what they found beneficial, what they did, why they wanted to do it. Screenshots of trust newsletters. We were lucky that we'd had a couple of staff who were awarded Employee of the Month, so we could evidence that. We had quite a few photos of staff receiving awards, which was lovely. Agendas of away days that looked across our whole system, so that showed system working and integration with our partners around the system. Examples of regular departmental meetings, so that's kind of our day-to-day, our week-to-week meetings. We had lots of examples there. And under workforce and career, there's lots of things that you can add, but flexible working and samples of agreements, I was able to speak to staff again who didn't necessarily want to get involved in this and be engaged at the beginning, but I was able to go to them and say, you know, we're looking at flexible working. How did it work for you? Is there anything that we could have done better for you? Have you got your agreement in place? And they were more than happy then to get involved, which was great. We had a couple of local initiatives within the organisation. You said we did, and chat with Matt, and Matt's our Director of Finance. And once a month, we were able to come and have a chat with him, and he'd provide biscuits and refreshments for us. And it was just an opportunity to have an hour, usually, away from the job. So that was part of our evidence. Corporate, again, examples of working within the system. How do we work? Why do we work? Do we share information across the system? We did have that, but I couldn't, again, going back to the beginning, I couldn't do that on my own. So I was going to my financial management colleagues and other colleagues and saying, what examples have we got? And actually, there's far more than you think there are going to be. It's just picking them out from everything else that we do. Screenshots of involvement with our service users, whether that be our AP, our AR, or financial management colleagues. Any of them were telling me and showing me where they'd got involvement. So it wasn't just your board reports, it was your attendance at meetings, it was your ad hoc attendance. How are we helping our service users and making sure that we were achieving financial balance at the time? And meeting invites, showing interaction with our budget holders. Were they regular? Could we evidence that they were regular? Who were we seeing? Those types of things. So what did we learn? You need to have a champion. You definitely need to have a champion who's going to really push this forward. I was quite passionate about it. Again, at the beginning, I did have a little bit of a wobble, but I really, really wanted this to achieve. So by hook or by crook, I was going to get there, and I just needed to pull people into what I was doing and allowing them to understand why we were going through this process. I would say it's good to have a bit of competition. If others are moving forward and it's incentive to move us on. Milton Keynes at the time were going through level 2 as well. They achieved theirs in the August. They went through the August submission. So at the time, it was like, oh no, we need to get a bit of a wiggle on with this. So we were absolutely determined then that we would go through December. Use the Teams channel to share information. Jane was our assessor, plus 2 others who were really, really helpful and talked us through what we needed to do. Talk to those that have gone through it within your system, and if you haven't got something, more often than not, somebody else will have. So ask, rather than sitting there trying to write a strategy, ask somebody else, and they will have something in a format that they can share with you, whether it's within your system or external to that. And some of my external colleagues were really, really helpful in that respect. I will say that some areas aren't as easy to evidence as others, and that's where the communication within the organisation and those that have been through the process is key. Find out what others have put down, because you might think, oh, I haven't got anything, and others say, well, have you considered doing X, Y, and Z? And that's good to know. It's really important that all staff understand what the accreditation is and how they can contribute, because at some point you're going to need, 2 lines down, 25% of the staff to meet with the assessors, and not everybody is going to be as engaged. Not everybody has the same point of view or experience as myself, who's very passionate about this. Others will go, why are we doing this? What's the point? So it's going to take some time, but you've really got to make sure that others are engaged. We're over 2 sites, so some of my colleagues over at Luton, or if I went over to Luton, as I'm primarily Bedford based, and we'd make sure that we would talk to all of the staff through meetings or one-to-one. That was always open to them, just so that they understand as well as us what's going on. You've got your 25% of staff to meet with the assessors. If communication has been good, then it should be absolutely fine. If you're going to pull staff into that meeting with the assessors and they don't know why they're there or don't understand, it's going to be really tricky for them and for you to watch. There will be staff who don't generally speak up. A lot of encouragement was needed for them to share their views. And I would say pick an area where they're comfortable and then encourage them to contribute. So I've used flexible working. I've got a couple of members of staff who had flexible working agreements, but they weren't necessarily willing to speak up at the beginning. But when we went in to meet our assessors, I think pretty much everybody, because of the time that had been spent with the staff, I think everybody shared some type of a view, and I think that's fair, isn't it? And they were willing to do so. It wasn't because anybody had said to them, you must say. It was very much about them. We want to contribute. We know now why we're doing it. The whole process did highlight gaps within the organisation. We knew that there were things that we hadn't got. At the beginning, I said we knew we weren't perfect, and we're not, and we're still not. But actually, to highlight the gaps, I now know what I need to be doing going forward. For example, the business continuity plan, skills audit, we've got a business continuity plan for each of our separate organisations, but not as a combined. So the assessors, let's say Jane, Tom, and the other lady that was there, they all understood that we were working towards that. So don't think that you're going to tick every single criteria and say this is all hunky-dory. We're well on the way. Are we doing something about it? Of course we are. Do we have a plan going forward? Yes, and we could evidence that. I've put that, and I can't see Jane, the first assessor meeting was slightly terrifying. That's probably not the right word. It was more that we wanted to do well, and we were providing all this evidence, and we didn't know really what was expected of us. So for me sitting there, and there was some reds and there were some blues and some yellows, and it wasn't that the assessors were terrifying, it was just me that was putting probably too much pressure on myself, and Aisha and Jonathan were there as well. But it did provide an insight into what was required, what further evidence was needed, and Jane's going to talk about that. And we were able to explain our narrative, which was really helpful, because as I say, I thought I was writing down everything that I knew and the way I understood it, but it doesn't always come across like that to somebody else. We did have 2 of our budget holders were expected to attend a meeting with the assessors. I spent some time with them prior to the meeting so that they knew what was expected of them. And that was really useful from their point of view. And I shared the guidance with them, and I shared the template with them as well, so that they knew what was going to be asked of them. Obviously, I didn't give them any answers, but they knew what was going to be required. I sat in on those meetings, but I didn't contribute. So it was really good to hear what they were saying about us as well. Brief the Director of Finance, who will have provided evidence, and they will be called to have a session with the assessor. And actually it was Matt who came to me and said, what do I need to say? What do I need to be saying? What's on, what do I need to be talking about? So I had some time with him as well, just taking him through where we were, what I thought we were weaker on, and what we needed to, what gaps we'd identified. So he knew all of that going into it as well. I would say don't underestimate how invested you are in the process. It was something that I really, really wanted to achieve for me, for the organisation, for my colleagues. And we had our staff meeting, which again, I attended but didn't say anything. And at the end of that, we dropped off. The assessors were great. The staff all spoke, and then there were some really lovely comments. And I went into another office and I just started crying because I was totally overwhelmed by it at that point. And celebrate your success, both within the finance team and more widely. It is an achievement to achieve level 1, level 2, and we're thinking about level 3, but not in the too distant future, I don't think. Get the message out there that you've gone through this process, this is what it entailed, and this is what we achieved and why we achieved it. And when the assessors give you your final report, there are some words in there as to what went well and what we needed to address going forward. And I could share that with the team, I could share that with the budget holders, and I could share that then within our trust as an organisation. And I think it is something to shout about, and we don't get finance have always seemed as a bit of blockers, and finance have said, but this is really, really good for us as a team. So I've shared that within the organisation. And this is us, Aisha, myself, Jonathan, and a couple of other colleagues, and we received our certificate at the HFMA conference. So that was really exciting for us. We looked slightly scared, I think, in that photo, but yeah. That's me done, David. Was that too quick, too slow?
No, that was perfect, Sonia. What I'm going to suggest we do is just let Jane, I know Jane's got a few things that she wants to say, so we'll just let Jane go do her presentation, and then we'll take all the questions at the end, if that's okay, Sonia, unless you have to shoot off.
Fine. No, I'm here.
No. Okay, good. Well, we'll pass. Jane, are you going to do I think we can still, there you go.
Brilliant. So can you see my slides?
We can, Jane, and don't forget to introduce yourself as well. So,
yeah, brilliant stuff. So yeah, hello. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Jane Paling. I head up the Finance Academy in the east of England, and as Sonia's already said, I had the pleasure of being one of the set of assessors on the Beds Hospital accreditation. And yeah, so it was really so thanks, Sonia, that was really great taking it through. And obviously we've got people on the call who have already done their level 2 and level 3, I suspect, some that haven't yet, and lots of people that are hopefully here because they're going to join our important group of assessors. And I do say important because what's really actually great to hear you say, Sonia, is what a difference it makes for your organisation going through the process, both in terms of achieving it, but also the process itself. And the assessors are really, really key to making all of this work. So, you know, a huge shout out to everyone on the call who's thinking of joining that group. It's a brilliant thing for the organisations that we assess, but hopefully you'll also hear later on the training about how it's good for you and what you can get out of it as well. So hopefully it's a win-win. But so just quickly take you through, if I can get the right slides, things to move, a little bit about what happened in the background. So so Sonia and Jonathan and Aisha and all the team did a lot of work on their basically on all the different criteria, and as Sonia showed you earlier, it's sort of separated into 6 sections. And from the assessor point of view, what you need is a way of looking at the evidence that that the organisation wants to give you against all the different criteria there. So just being really, really basic, I thought I'd show you a quick team shot of the way, a screenshot of the way that that we did this accreditation, and that, to be honest, that's been the method that I've been using, and I think most people are using now, is to set up a channel on the One NHS Finance shared Teams system, and you can see that I've got lots of different ones there, but this is the one that was set up for the Bedfordshire Hospitals accreditation. So within that, what we do is, you just, in a very basic point of view, we set up a section, a little subfolder for each of the sort of 6 main areas into which Sonia and the team at Beds could put their overall bits of evidence, bit like you might do in an audit, but just remembering it's not an audit, it very much is just a kind of a peer-to-peer look. And we also set up in there a little subfolder to put things around level 1, because remembering that level 2 is also checking on the level 1 as well. So we did put a little folder in there to collect the level 1 submission and a few key bits from that, and also a kind of a subfolder at the top where we could put in the kind of overall information that related to the organisation. And the key thing that contained in this accreditation was a spreadsheet that had all of the different criteria on it, and the trust could then use that to log their evidence. So moving on to the next slide. So this is a little extract from the spreadsheet, and I've just chosen a couple of the criteria that I actually looked at. So there were 6 sections, and we split those 6 sections between the 3 assessors, and we took 2 sections each. I happened to look at this section, section 3, which was around professional development. And if you look on the screen, criteria 2.3c, which is the one I just call celebrating success, you can see there what we're looking for is there is evidence that success is celebrated within the organisation and beyond. So what the trust did, as Sonia said, she said they write a narrative, and that's the one shown here, then the narrative. So if you've done level 1 and you've seen the kind of word version of the narrative, it's the same thing as that. It's the box where you write down what have you done. So you can use that to kind of give a general impression of the things that you've done. And you can see in here, I didn't highlight them at the time, I just highlighted them for this presentation, but there's absolutely loads of stuff that that they were highlighting around celebrating success, around newsletter. Then I knew that that Sonia had won one of the FACE awards at the Value Maker conference the previous year. They also wrote in there about people being nominated for individual of the month across the team, which is great. So finance is getting wider recognition, not just within finance, and also other things here around different meetings and how exam success is celebrated. So great stuff. So the narrative is giving me lots and lots of examples. But we all know, and you know, Sonia's a bit dodgy. She could write anything really, and so as an assessor, what we did want to do was make sure that she wasn't just making it up. I do say that because I know Sonia very well, and she would never make anything up at all. But just for effect, yeah, Sonia could be making it all up. So we did need to actually see some of these things. So what she did within that section of 2.3c, she then put in there lots and lots of different bits of evidence. Now, I'm not going to take you through the actual bits, but you can see the kind of things that that were put into there. So there were extracts from chief exec's updates. There's the copies of a newsletter, not multiple ones, but you know, enough to show us that the newsletter happened and that it included things around success. Lots of things, as Sonia said earlier, screenshots. They're really useful because you can just highlight the bit rather than sending through huge documents. And so lots and lots of bits and pieces that you could basically triangulate what's being said in the narrative and basically know that you know, there's good solid evidence there. And you can see when I got onto so the spreadsheet runs across, the trust puts its narrative in some cases use this column to tell you what they've included as evidence. In Bed's case they didn't, we just looked in the folder. But then the assessors, you go through and you make a sort of a first set of comments. And in terms of this one at the time, I was obviously feeling quite enthusiastic at the time because I put lots of good evidence seen before even getting to this folder, and that's partly because I could see it in the narrative, but also because I knew the trust had done lots of things here. And I picked it out as an area that I'd want to highlight some best practice from in terms of the report. So all good stuff in terms of celebrating success, which is, you know, no less than I would expect from BEDS. I know that they're incredibly good at that. But to pick on a different criteria, if you look at the one above it, this was one that didn't go quite so smoothly first time round. So this criteria here, 2.3b, this is around evidence around secondments and job shadowing, and that this is encouraged. Now, so again, I looked at the narrative and for the purposes of this presentation, highlighted a few bits, and it's talking in very positive terms about things, but it's all about we encourage this and this will be made available, etc. It's kind of a little bit more vague in terms of the evidence there. So I had a look in the evidence file, and there was quite a lot in here around job shadowing, so lots of evidence of people going on job shadowing, and there was also a sort of secondment policy, but that was an organisational secondment policy. And it kind of left me with a little bit, okay, I think this is going on, but I can't really see it. I can't kind of touch and feel it enough. So so if you go back to the previous one, you can see that in my assessor's comments, I put that some examples of shadowing were given, but in the column where we noted down as assessors if we needed additional evidence, I went in and said, we've got some evidence around this, but we could do with some more on staff being willing and able to uptake secondments. So that's what so that was the feedback to the trust. We, as Sonia said earlier, there'd be a whole load of things that'd be green, whole load of things that would be amber, that basically said we've got some evidence, but it's not quite there yet. There weren't too many that were red, apart from the whole missing section that Sonia talked about earlier, but there were quite a few that were amber, and that's very much what you'd expect at the first stage of an assessment. That you will, you know, there'll be some things that are just, you know, it's clear, it's really upbound or obvious. You can mark those as green. I think David sometimes uses blue as well, don't you, to sort of to say that they're, you know, almost more than complete. But the orange ones or the amber ones needed a little bit more evidence. So Sonia went away with that feedback after scary assessors had met with her, and she then went back and added some more evidence. And in this case, she it's a bit more of a tricky one, but the trust wrote a document about where how people are given opportunities. They explained that they hadn't actually got anyone on secondment at the moment, but where they'd shared the information, you know, the fact that they pointed me back to this one, which I probably hadn't looked at in lots of detail, which was the system-wide value maker strategy, which includes in there statements about how secondments will be offered around the system, etc. And so once she'd provided me with more information, explained how it all worked in practice, I was then able to go in and say, I've seen more information on this, and therefore in my second set of RAG status updates, I was able to move that one from amber to green. So pretty obvious, really. It's just about collecting that the evidence that makes you feel satisfied as an assessor that the criteria has been met. That's, I mean, it's I make it sound really obvious when you do it, but it's, I think sometimes, and I'll talk a little bit if I've got a few minutes more, David, about what's good evidence, etc., and what isn't. Sometimes there's a bit of a temptation to see a word in there and go, I'm going to give the assessors everything that I can possibly think of on the subject of that word, almost as though you've done a kind of a web search and thrown everything at it, and that can actually be unhelpful because you just get too many things that are not really relating to it. What you're looking for is just have they given you the answer to the question? So you can see that's just how we worked through it. It's quite usual to have an initial evidence trawl. Assessors will come up with a series of, you know, absolutely fine, need a bit more, and hopefully not too many of these, but no evidence at all, and to build up that evidence during the accreditation process. And as well, you see that there's a little column here that I didn't use it in these particular ones, but where you can put a little note in saying, look, we can't get this evidence from the documents. Let's pick this up at interview, or we might want to just kind of triangulate this at interview. So the assessors is a good idea to go through and make a note of the things that you particularly do want to pick up or put more emphasis on when you've got your interviews. So really quickly, if I've got a few minutes, David, just in terms of these are my thoughts only, but what I think makes good evidence. So sorry for anyone who was on the session that David and I did last week, but I talked about exam technique. There is a bit of exam technique here, and I kind of, as assessors, we're all doing this alongside our day job. So there is something about encouraging your organisation that you're assessing to make your life easy as possible. So make sure it's clearly labelled, make sure you can kind of see what it contains, try and make sure you encourage them to make it easy to follow rather than giving you massive 64-page documents that you've got to read all of it and you're actually looking for one little comment. If you can encourage them to highlight it, etc., just try, just encourage people to kind of work with you. It's not an audit. It really isn't. It's about kind of working together to get to an answer. So as I said earlier, let's try, a good evidence for me addresses the relevant requirements of the criteria. So if it's back to the secondments one and the job shadowing, got lots of information about job shadowing, but not got the secondments bit. Make sure that good evidence addresses all the requirements of the criteria and it tells you what you want to know, really. As Sonia said earlier, screenshots and videos, if you've got them. I know quite a lot of people do videos for budget holder training, etc. So sending links to those or sending through screenshots is, firstly, there's much smaller files and you can just get so much more quickly into the evidence. So that's a great thing to encourage people to do. And where possible, making sure that the evidence is up to date. I know this wouldn't happen. It certainly wouldn't happen at Bedfordshire hospitals, but sometimes you do get the impression a little bit that things have been created for the accreditation. So whilst you want it to be up to date, you also want it to show that things have been embedded. Particularly for a policy or a strategy, evidence showing it's been in place for a while and it's part of everyday working is great. So there is a bit of a balancing act here. You want it to be up to date, but preferably up to date version of something that that's been in place for a while. And that's a nirvana. Sometimes you have to compromise a little bit as part of the accreditation, but you are looking for sort of evidence that things have been in place, that they're well understood and used, and just part of the day-to-day working, really. And the final one, in terms of what I think makes good evidence, is that you can see that it relates to the finance department. Sometimes things like business continuity, there may be no finance specific, and so an organisational policy might be the best thing that you can get, but it's what you really need to see is how that's working in practice in the finance team. So I tend to push back where people just throw a load of organisational policies in, and I can't see how that's actually working in finance, because it's how do you know that flexible working is working in finance if you've just got an organisational policy on it? There might that it's possible that the finance department has a completely different kind of custom and practice to what's going on in the organisation. So I would say try and make sure that you get either some verbal or written assurance that particular things do relate to the teams that you're actually doing the assessment for. So nearly there, David. In terms of things that are less helpful, it's just the opposite way around, really. Just one thing to watch for is it's quite easy with the shared team system to end up with links and things that you can't actually access. So do check them straight away as an assessor, because it's the Teams is a bit of it's wonderful when it works, but it's not, it's very easy for it to be a bit glitchy. So make sure that you can follow the links and you can actually see what it is that you need. This is something that we picked up at the training last week. Just because someone's been so a meeting invite or an attendance list doesn't really tell you what went on at that meeting. So it can be helpful to show that finance has been involved in things, but it's much better, much more powerful evidence if you see either an extract from a minute that showed what someone was reporting on, or some feedback from that meeting, or some outputs or outcomes, rather than just a whole list of, well, here's lots of meeting invites. That's kind of some of the evidence, but it's probably not enough on its own. As I say, I get really annoyed if I have to read a long policy, whether that's part of being an assessor or even in my former life. So do try to push back a little bit and ask people to extract for you the relevant bits or send you a screenshot, rather than feel that you've got to trawl through massive long documents. Just moving on to the bottom row. I mean, it can be useful to have evidence that relates to like a single function within finance as an example, and it's not, it doesn't mean that just because it only relates to, say, the AP department or the management accounts department, doesn't mean that that's necessarily wrong. But you might need to double check, does this apply across the whole department? Are there other examples? So again, you feel free to do that as an assessor, just to ask for a different example or a little bit more. I've already spoken about, you sometimes get bombarded with all sorts of things that have just got like a keyword in them. Try to make sure that you get an evidence that does actually answer the question. And also, you can sometimes be completely bombarded. We might get like a whole a weekly newsletter, and you might get a whole year's worth. Well, that's great, but do I really need to read? I'm only actually probably going to have a look at a couple of them. So try and encourage whoever you're assessing to think about it from your point of view. Try and give them a few guidelines about what would actually be useful for you. Just because you've only got limited time to do this, and so what you want to do is be concentrating on the things that actually make a difference and will help you make a decision, rather than wading through lots and lots of bits and pieces. So that's all I've got to say, David, if that's okay. I'll stop sharing my screen. We can see if there are any.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's really helpful. Thank you to Sonia and Jonathan for your presentation. Really, really interesting, detailed stuff around the process. Do colleagues have any particular questions at this moment in time? Kim, thank you. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I was just interested in Bedford, knowing that they were a merged department, and I was just wondering, from an assessor's point of view, are there any sort of areas that you would focus on more, with it being sort of I suppose a fairly newly created department?
Yeah, I mean that is really it's quite an interesting difference, actually, Kim. And I think what we did was we knew that there were some instances where systems were slightly different. I think around you, the way that you were capturing appraisals, etc., were slightly different. So what we did was we made sure that we got examples from both parts, if you like. And we also asked a little bit about it during the team meetings. Because one of the things that we wanted to make sure was that I mean, mergers, etc., are always stressful. I've been through plenty of them, and it can take quite a while for everyone to be working as one. So whilst we weren't looking for absolute perfection, we were looking for that kind of sense of how had this worked. Did the department view itself as one overall team in the main? And we actually got some really good positive comments coming through in this particular accreditation as in terms of that. We got a really good sense that there had been a lot of joint working, and this had all been going on during COVID, as so it was obviously quite a tricky time. But it was something that what we didn't want to see was that effectively there were two separate departments working, not communicating well. And so, as I say, we just we did a little bit of extra checking around it, but nothing too stressful. And we weren't we weren't looking for absolutely everything had to be on the new header or anything like that. It was more about getting that general sense that the combined department had got a kind of a plan to work together in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Sonia, did you want to come in? Oh, Jonathan, you want to come in there?
Yeah, probably just going to add that we left it a couple of years before we decided to do level 2, just because I don't think we had the culture or the team there just yet at that point. And it took us a while to build that up. And then once we had that, we felt a lot more confident doing the level 2 stuff.
Thanks. I think that's a really important point, that it's the organisation that drives when they're ready to move to level 2, and they need to be confident to do that. I think that's a really good point, Jonathan. Thank you for that. Stephen, you have a question, sir.
Hello. So I don't know whether it's for the assessor side or for Sonia and Jonathan's side, but if you've got, let's call them conscientious objectors in your team, who maybe you wouldn't want the assessors to talk to because either they don't see the value of it or they think maybe actually you can write this all down in the checklist, but I don't think it's actually happening in person. Do you send them away on a school trip for a week when the assessors are in, or maybe you don't have any in Bedfordshire, but I think I can think of one or two in Gloucestershire who I think they've got valid reasons, but maybe if they spoke to the assessors, that might scupper the application.
Yes, we did have some, and I think we've probably still got some, in all honesty, if I'm being honest. It was about talking to them and explaining, and there was always something, whilst they may not have agreed with the whole process or every single criteria, there was always something within that. And I focused on the flexible working. So you know, you've got flexible working agreement, that's part of it. So whilst you don't like the appraisal process, you like other things, and it was bringing that focus back to, you know, what are you finding positive rather than being negative Nancy, as I call it. I don't know, Aisha, do you want to say anything on that? Because you were on the Luton site, weren't you? Oh, on the Luton site.
Yeah, I will come in here. So I think one thing that and it's good to reiterate this, is that Sonia did really, really well, is that journey and the why. As we said, that was made really clear from the onset, and I think a lot of people who were like, what's this for, why are we doing it, isn't it just a waste of time? It was that constantly coming back and sort of having that re-engagement with the team, and that was really important because yeah, not everyone will be on board, and I think the people who were obviously put in more effort, but I think everyone, and I'm sitting in a big room, and I think all of us thought, oh, I can contribute to that, or I can put something forward for that this will work, and as I said, it was to do with the why and having that really clear from the onset and then throughout. That's what I would say. I think Sonia did an amazing job at being that focal point for us, and she did make a lot of effort to be around and you know, make it clear that this was an ongoing thing that we were trying to pursue, but that she was still open to everyone's, you know, that what they actually thought, and just like she said, finding the positive in it.
Stephen, a couple of things from me as an assessor that I would say is that, first of all, we'll cover this in my session. With the assessors are the people who choose the members of the finance team who we'll be speaking to. For that very reason, we don't want the positive people put forward and negative people hidden away in a cupboard for the day of the assessment. But I would also say, and I can see Jane, so I'm sure she'll nod if she agrees or shake head if she doesn't. If we went to do an assessment and every single person was super enthusiastic, saying everything was wonderful, I'd become very suspicious at that point that I was being set up. So I would always expect there to be some less enthusiastic people around the whole process. That's just part of life. And I think we used to talk about 20% of your staff will be really enthusiastic and really engaged. 20% won't care one way or the other. 60% will go along with whatever the consensus is. So there are always going to be people who are against it. So we try to speak with them if we can, and that doesn't mean it's going to derail the whole process. It just means you get a more realistic view of how that organisation sits at the time. Does that help, Stephen? Kim, did you get the answer you wanted from your question as well? Yeah, good stuff. Okay, I'm just conscious of the question in the chat, Sonia. Catherine at South Tees asked if you could possibly share your finance strategy, if that would be okay. What I suggest we do is if you send that to Becky, she can then maybe send that out to everybody, if that would be okay with you, to share that more widely.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem.
Lovely, thank you very much. So there will be time for questions. I'm going to go over some of the stuff that Jane's been over from a more strategic point of view in my presentation. I know that Jane may have to leave. Sonia is staying for the afternoon, so we'll be able to pick up any questions later. But I'm just going to move us on now because of my promise to keep the time with you. So just bear with me a second while I just share the first of my presentations. So, I'm hoping you can now see my slides. Yeah, I can only see you, Sonia, so if you can keep nodding, that's really helpful. Thank you. There is only one slide for this section, so it really isn't going to take very long. So this is just for those of you who are on the call, which hopefully is most of you who are interested in becoming an assessor, or are maybe already doing that and just wanted a little bit of a sort of refresher on where we are with this. So just a few key points around what we are looking for, what one NHS finance colleagues are looking for when you are signing up to become an assessor. So just running through each of these in turn. So there's obviously a degree of seniority. We always ask that the assessors work in a relatively senior, preferably a strategic role. The reasons for that are kind of set out really in the next 2 bullet points, which is to be an assessor, you've got to have a breadth of experience and understanding across the whole of the finance function. You've got to be able to assess all of the criteria fairly confidently, and understand that what they're driving at. You also need a degree of self-confidence and an ability to stand firm when you're less than happy with some of the evidence that's been put forward. So Sonia mentioned before about some of the issues that they'd encountered. If the assessor had just, if Jane and colleagues had just simply said, oh yes, that's fine, no problem at all, then that means that really the assessment that Sonia would have achieved wouldn't have met the grade. And we want to make sure, to be fair to all our organisations, that if you're being assessed, no matter who your assessors are, you know that you are all of a reasonably comparable standard. So it would be really poor for Sonia if Bedford had been knocked back repeatedly, whereas an organisation had been allowed to go through because the assessor hadn't had the confidence to say, actually, I'm not sure the evidence is all there for you at the moment. So that self-confidence, that ability to stand firm, does come with a degree of seniority from your assessors. Obviously, we would prefer you to have a good knowledge of the Towards Excellence process, and this afternoon is contributing towards that, I would hope. And then ideally, as an assessor, this isn't an absolute given, but we think there's huge benefits if you are from an accredited organisation yourself. So someone like Sonia or Jonathan, who've been through the process, have a better understanding of what it's all about, and will make, in our opinion, better assessors because they've got a sort of a feeling for how that works and what it is that we're looking for. Jane did say, and I'll come back to this in my session in a moment, that it's not an audit. However, those audit skills of having a detailed methodological approach are really important. You do need to have the gumption to go through each of the criteria in turn, work out whether or not the evidence is there, and go back to colleagues and say, I'm sorry, we need a little bit more around this, please. And that kind of approach really does help. Again, both Sonia and Jane have alluded to this. You are doing this over and above your existing day job, so you do need to have an enthusiasm for it, a willingness to commit to the process. We'll come on to the time factor in my next presentation, but there is a significant degree of commitment needed if you're going to make this work for you and for the organisations you're working with. And then finally, I think it's really important that you're happy to share your knowledge. So I know that Jane and I, when we go in to do assessments, we're very happy to say, oh, yeah, you're not quite there with this, but we know an organisation who could do that, who could share that information with you, or this is something that we've done in the past. And that's a really important part of being an assessor, is that ability to, or that willingness to share your experience and your knowledge, and equally to be open to learning from others. One of the things that I'm hoping that Darryl will mention when he speaks later, when he joins us, is the real pleasure that you get from going to do an assessment and taking something away from that organisation and using that in your own organisation. Colleagues in the Northwest, where we've been running this process for a number of years now, frequently talk about stealing ideas with pride. So going into an organisation, seeing some of their processes, and using those within their own teams. So I think that's a really important part of being an assessor as well. So hopefully those of you who are on the call already have all of those all those things in place and are ready and willing and able to be assessors. There's nothing there that's absolutely nailed on. You have to have it, and if you don't, we won't let you be an assessor. But we think those are the kind of things that we're looking for in our assessors for level 2 and level 3 organisations. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and ask if anyone's got any questions. And Stephen, over to you, sir. Oh, Have you changed your mind, Steve? Was that a previous hand?
Didn't have my hand up for a while, so it might just be delay on your.
Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Okay, so are there any further questions around that part of this afternoon's presentation? Okay, if we'll just grab a quick break, people can go and grab a glass of water, cup of tea, and we will start again at 3 o'clock, if that would be okay. So we'll see you all then. Thanks, folks. Hi, everyone. So I am now getting a little bit concerned that Daryl, I don't think, has joined the call yet. So Becky, if you could maybe chase him up for me and see if he is joining us, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. If not, I do have I have a presentation from a previous event that I can use, but it's not my presentation. But I can certainly go through that with colleagues and just give some of the information that we shared previously. So, with huge thanks to Sonia and Jane for their presentations earlier on. What I'm going to do now is spend a little bit of time with you, just talking about a more detailed approach to the assessment itself, and what seems to work as good practice for myself and for colleagues that we've sort of over the years have put together as a way of working. So I will share my presentation with you again, if you just bear with me a second. So I'm hoping that you can see that. Can someone just say you can see it, please? Yeah, great stuff. Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you in some detail around the process, if that's okay. Hopefully this will be useful. What I would say is that I can't see you on the screen, but if you have any questions, please do just shout out and I'll try and answer them for you. I can now see you all. That's helpful. So yeah, please do just raise your hand or shout out as I'm going through. I'd rather do that than save all the questions for the end, if that's okay. That's I find that way works better with this particular presentation. So I'm going to talk you through the various stages of how I approach doing an assessment, and this will pick up some of the things that Jane mentioned earlier on. Please do, as I say, give me a shout if you have any questions. So this is the stage one, and this is the process that Jane talked through earlier when she was going through Bedford's evidence and picking out some of the issues that she had, some of the things where there were gaps, some of the things that were missing. I think it is really important to say that if you're doing a level 2 assessment, you are looking at all the evidence for level 1 and for level 2. And if you're doing level 3, you're doing all 3 levels of evidence. You don't need to, if you're doing level 2, you don't need to spend a long time trawling through level 1, but you do need to make sure that there are certain things in place. I'll come on to those in a minute. What we've just introduced as red lines, things that must be in place. And you need to make sure that the evidence that's been provided for level 1 is the latest version of the proformas. Sonia mentioned earlier about an issue they had with something that was missing. Please do ensure that the trust that you're working with, or the organisation that you're working with, is using the very latest version. They are available on the website. The current versions have 2 numbers and a letter. So the first of the criteria is 11A, and that will tell you that you've got the latest version of those that you're using. Jane referred to using Teams to share information. That seems to be a really. I've just seen Daryl's joined the call. I can relax a little bit now. Good afternoon, Daryl. Good to see you. Jane talked previously about sharing information via Teams and shared her screen with you. That we find that's a really useful way of doing this, of sharing the information presently. Have in the past used a piece of software called Smartsheets, which is very clever. It's like an advanced version of Teams. You can add notes in and share spreadsheets live on that. That's really helpful. There's the old-fashioned way of doing a big file transfer across between organizations. I don't ever want to go back to the days of going to an organization having to sit and plow through 6 lever arch files of paperwork to try and work out exactly what it is you're trying to see. So there are various ways you can do that. You need to sort that out with the organization you're working with. Teams is a good fallback position. Sonia made this clear in her presentation that a narrative style is really helpful. What you don't want in the pro forma is a whole load of bullet points supported by a bullet point list of evidence. You really want some sort of a method of walking you through the evidence that's been provided. And Sonia said that Jonathan and colleagues had helped her in understanding or making sure that narrative made perfect sense. Jane has talked at length about the shortfalls, the missing evidence, and Sonia talked about the work they've done to move from this stage to the next stage, and I'll come to that in a minute. We have recently nationally introduced some red lines, and again, I'll come to those in a minute as well. Those are things that when you're doing a level 2 assessment, you absolutely have to make sure are in place at level 1, and which colleagues at 1NHS Finance will be checking when level 1 submissions are sent in. Just a few things we need to be absolutely clear are in place. Jane mentioned my use of a blue evidence rating. So I have my brag system, which is basically blue is everything seems to be fine, but you want to just discuss that with the staff on the day during the visit that we talked about. Red is that the evidence is just not there or not to the required level. Amber, Jane talked through a couple of those earlier, and green is where the evidence is good. Once you've been through the schedule and you've got your rating, then share that with colleagues. and agree a date by which the new pro forma will be sent in to you. One thing that I do suggest you do, if you can, if you have the time, is to make sure that at least 2 of you assess each of the sections of the evidence. So you've got 2 people's view on the evidence. It's not just down to one of you to say yes or no. Again, going back to that point that we appreciate you're all busy working professionals, that might not be possible, but that triangulation just gives a more solid base for the review, really. I'll just talk briefly about what we've caught, and I'll share these slides with you, so no need to make extensive notes on this. We'll make sure they come out to you, and you can have this information when you do an assessment. So these are the criteria that the Towards Excellence group nationally has said must be in place. So I'm not going to read through each one in detail, but there are a number of criteria where they now have to be very clear evidence that these things are in place and provided to you. They're all at level 1. There's nothing that's particularly at level 2, but as a level 2 assessor, you do need to just make sure that these particular level 1 items have been signed off. They're all, I think, fairly self-explanatory, and most of them relate to interaction with NHS Finance, and then the things that you would absolutely expect to be in place for a good organisation. So up-to-date job descriptions, relevant objectives, personal development plans, those sort of things that you really can't be running a finance team in this day and age without having those sort of things in place. So those are the first couple of pages. The last ones are here. I'll come back to 1.3.E in a second, but you'll see that most of those, the rest of those, are around how the organisation is working with One NHS Finance nationally. Just to say that although we do ask organisations to have the relevant professional body accreditation, so your registration with where you have professionals from those organisations, we do recognise that there are issues with CIMA at the moment as they are revising their process. CIMA will say that when will give you information about where an organisation was when they changed their system. So we are accepting that some of those will be out of date but can't be updated at the moment. And we do recognise that there is a charge for the SITFA process. What we would say is, if it's for a handful of staff, so 1 or 2 staff, we probably wouldn't expect colleagues to have the SITFA registration. But if there are 10, 12 staff in the team who are from SITFA, it's a small fee to pay to make sure that they have the support that they need. So those are the things that the national group has agreed absolutely must be in place. I'm just going to pause very briefly there to ask if anyone's got any questions around any of that first stage of the process that Jane's talked with you in some detail earlier, and I've just covered off there. Okay, so no hands, so I'll move on. Stage 2, again, this is something that Jane referred to earlier on in her presentation. This is, and Sonia talked about this, where you've had the chance to look at the evidence. Some of it wasn't quite right, wasn't quite strong enough. Give the organisation a chance to come back to you with some agreed new evidence. Make sure that's reviewed and agreed, and then you have a final version of the pro forma, and that is the version that you will be talking through with the staff on the day of the visit, which I'll come to in a second. It can be changed. The final version can be changed after the visit, but you do need a version that you're talking through with the staff on the day when you talk through with them. So I'm not going to spend too long on that one. I think that's fairly self-evident, and I think Jane's presentation earlier on really made that whole process very clear. Stage 3 of the process then is the visit to the organisation. The first bullet point does say you can do it via Teams. I would absolutely recommend, if you can, doing it in person. I think that the visit to the organisation is much better if you can do that in person. I recognise that if you're based in Newcastle upon Tyne and you're assessing somebody in Penzance, that might not be that straightforward, but colleagues at One NHS Finance do try to pair us up with relatively local organisations. It's just that you get a real feel for the organisation when you go in to visit, how you're welcomed, what the walk around feels like, how people treat you. That whole thing is much better on a face-to-face basis. You can, and I have done this in my last couple of assessments, have a face-to-face process generally, but have some Teams meetings within that. So we heard earlier that colleagues at Bedford are across 2 sites. So people might have gone to, was it Bedford and Luton, Sonia? Is that where the two were? So the assessors may have gone to Bedford and then talk to some staff from Luton over Teams. That's fine, but we really would suggest that one part of the visit should be in person. Then, bit of detail here around who you need to see on the day and the way in which this can work. This would be my preferred way of working. It's not fixed in tablets of stone, so you can move these meetings around if you need to. It's always a good idea to meet up with the people who've done the work producing the document. So in Sonia's case, that would have been Sonia and Jonathan and others, just to sit and talk to them for a little while, make sure they're happy with everything. You need to speak with the finance director. You need to speak to 25% of the finance team, really, if you can, a minimum of 3. As we said before, we'd expect you to be choosing which staff you wanted to speak to, subject to people being on holiday or being off sick or whatever else, but we'd expect you to be choosing which staff you wanted to speak with. So you weren't being, the organisation wasn't cherry picking the enthusiasts. You can see people in groups. Obviously, we've got some organisations in the Northwest that have got over 100 staff. You certainly wouldn't want to be having 25 individual meetings. You can do those in groups of probably no more than 8 or 9 staff. I think if you get groups bigger than that, you're not going to get everyone speaking in the meetings. But you can do that in groups if that helps. You do need to see at least 2 non-finance staff. We would very strongly recommend they're budget holders, so you can get a really good understanding of how the finance team interact with the budget holders. I would also go a little bit further and say if they could be clinical budget holders, that gives you a really good insight there. In my experience, clinicians are quite happy to be positively critical. So they will give you a warts and all view of the finance function. And that's what you're after. You don't want to go in and have a sugar-coated view of things. You want to get a real understanding on the basis it won't be perfect. No finance function, no finance team is perfect, but you want to see that the clinicians have they trust and understand what the finance team are trying to do. If you are visiting a level 3 organisation, you'll need to see the chief exec. That can be quite hard to arrange on the day. It's perfectly okay to do that either before or after the meeting, after the visit, if that's the only time you can get to see the chief exec. But you do need to have some time with them for level 3. And then I would very strongly suggest that at the end of the day, you have a meeting with the people who've been leading the process, just to talk them through where you've got to. And then just a couple of other bits for you here. As Sonia mentioned, there are some guidance questions in the document that's on the website. They are discussions, not interviews. I was a little bit concerned to hear that Sonia had been so worried about her visit and then had cried afterwards. That's not quite how the process should feel. They are discussions with colleagues. You're getting a feel for the team. You're trying to understand how things work within that organisation. You're not holding people's feet to the fire and saying you need that kind of approach to it. And another very small point would be that if you're meeting via Teams, do set up each separate meeting on Teams. Don't have one continuous meeting through the day, because I did that once and it was an absolute nightmare with people coming in and out of the meeting all day. So do set up meetings and leave yourself time to grab some lunch, go to the toilet, get a cup of tea, whatever it happens to be. Don't have back-to-back meetings. It would be just about impossible. I'm just going to pause again very briefly there, see if there's any questions around any of that part of the process. Hopefully it's all quite straightforward. Matt, good to see you, sir.
Hi.
Though I can't actually see, I can just see your background, but hello.
All right, I don't know what's. Oh, I know what's going on. There we go.
There you
Is that
go.
better?
I can see you now. Yeah. Hi.
So David, I'm sorry if I missed this point, but what? Sorry, I'm Director of Finance at Lincolnshire ICB. And what level of commitment are you likely to need to make to one set of one round, as it were, of this?
I'll come to that in a moment if I can, Matt.
Okay.
I will cover it off. If I don't cover it off in enough detail, come back to me again in a minute. So yeah. Okay. Any further questions at this point? Okay. So then, stage 4, the last part of the day will be a meeting with the staff, as we've just talked about. Please be aware that there are 3 potential outcomes. One is that the organisation is successful and you're going to recommend them for accreditation. One is that they're almost successful. There's just a couple of things you need to sign off to make sure they get through the process. And the third would be that they're not ready yet for assessment. We try not to talk about failure. This is not a pass or fail process. This is a supportive process. It's about making sure that organisations have what they need in place. And I'm not going to mention any names, but the last assessment that I did, we actually had the third of those outcomes where they weren't quite ready, but we told them what it was they needed to do. We told them the bits that were missing. We agreed a time frame with them when they'd come back to us, and we'd have that in place. And that's a really important thing to absolutely stress. You're not going into an organisation and saying you are failing. That I won't sugarcoat things again. That message was quite hard to deliver. Some of the team who we had to deliver that to were disappointed, but they understood, because the way we've been through the process and the way that we dealt with things, they understood that was the right outcome for them. And I know that they are currently working away on getting that those little bits and pieces introduced. One of the issues was what Jane referred to earlier. It was very clear that a couple of policies had been written 2 or 3 weeks before our visit, so therefore couldn't possibly have been embedded. So we're giving them time to embed those into the team before we'll pass them at the relevant level. And then please do be sure that before you leave the organisation, you have let them know exactly where they stand, and as I say, agreed a process with them. Stage 5 of the process is the report. There's a pro forma report on the website that needs to be written within 2 weeks of the visit, and I think that's good practice anyway, because if you leave it much longer than that, you're going to have forgotten many of the details anyway. The 4 parts are the report that you as the assessors write, giving your views on where the organisation stands, and the pro forma on the website is really clear what you need to do. You need an introduction from the organisation, and on page 9 of the guidance document, it does tell you what that should include, and that's a really important part of the process as well. You will have a final agreed version of the evidence schedule. That will probably be the version that we talked about at stage 2, but it may be that 1 or 2 things came out during the visit that would be useful. And you need the employer accreditation pro forma, which just shows you the dates for SIP for SEMA, ACCA, and so on, the accreditation for those. It's not a report written by the assessor on the organisation. It's a report about the organisation that all parties agree. And I think it's really key there that when you write the assessor report, you give the team the chance to feedback. It may be as simple as you got someone's name wrong, or you've got the job title wrong, you may have misunderstood something. It's really important that they get a chance to feedback on that. And then that document needs to be submitted to the central team by whichever deadline you're working to. And those are fixed on the website, but they are varied sometimes, just depending when the FLC date is. But if you work towards those three dates, that will stand you in pretty good stead. I'm just going to pause again very briefly. Any questions on the report or the final visit? The final meeting, sorry. Nope. Okay. So key factors, and this hopefully Matt will pick up your question. It's a developmental process. As I said, you're working with the organisation. You're not there to assess them. We're not CQC. We're working with them to get to a point where everyone's happy. I would suggest, in my experience, that you need probably 5 days in total. 3 days for the pre-work, 1 day for the visit, and then 1 day to write the report. That's probably a little bit of an overestimate, if I'm honest. I don't think you'll be spending a full day writing the report, but it may be that across a few days you need to spend some time to do that. Sonia and Jane both mentioned this earlier. You do need to ensure that the senior staff, particularly the finance director, are absolutely committed to the process. Those that haven't been successful, in my experience, are where the director of finance has not really been engaged. I've said it's not a CQC visit, they're discussions, not interviews. And you should sign everything off with the organisation, but on your terms. If you are 100% sure that an organisation hasn't quite met one of the criteria, you need to stand firm and have that discussion with them. So that's me done in terms of my suggested approach to the process. I'll stop sharing my screen. Hopefully that all made sense. And as I say, we will be sharing that presentation with you, so you've got some of the detail there. Does any of it raise any questions, any concerns? Anyone's got any points you want to raise at this point before I pass across to Daryl? Amanda.
Oh yeah, thank you. Just on the organisations that aren't quite there yet, is there any kind of appeal process? So if people are feeling particularly disgruntled about that as a result, is there a way that they can kind of escalate that, or is it just we've rated that you're not quite there yet and that decision remains?
I have to say, Amanda, in all my years of doing this, I've never had a situation where someone's wanted to appeal. I guess the answer is that they could go to the One NHS finance team and ask them to have a look at it again and get another review. We do always try to make sure that there are at least 2 assessors on every visit, so it's not one person's view against the team, as it were. But I guess that if there was real dissatisfaction, they'd have to go through to the central team. Daryl?
I was just going to say, if you're engaging properly as a team, then there will be no surprises, and it will be obvious where that their assessment is lacking. And so, to be honest, I would be really surprised if anybody would actually have the right grounds to appeal. Just because people can be successful and still have some actions depending on what sort of discussion has taken place, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next session in terms of my experience of being an assessor.
Thanks, Daryl. Yeah, and just to add to that, going back to the organisation that we delayed a little bit recently, when we talked to the finance director, they were absolutely convinced that we come to the right decision. When we explained why, they understood why that was the case, and they went back to their team to work with them. So yeah, I think you're right, Daryl. If you've been through the process correctly and you've had that level of engagement from day one, it should never be a surprise. Amanda? Matt, another question from you?
Yeah, similar to this, building on what Amanda said, is there any if an organisation needs to do a bit more work, are there any benefits to having the same assessment team, as it were, reassessing them once that work's concluded? Is that the sort of MO that you tend to operate with? Yeah.
Okay. So in the case I've just referred to, myself and my 2 colleagues have said that we won't go and do a whole new visit, but I think we said it would be September time. We'd have a chat with them then and see where things were. So we would always try to ensure that the same people followed the assessment through from the very first discussions around the evidence right through to actually finally signing off at the end.
And just another quick one. I think you know that in Lincolnshire we did it collectively, which obviously works for a small system like ours, where there are 4 NHS organisations, but wouldn't work everywhere. But given that there's so much interdependence with some aspects of the requirements, particularly around planning, and the fact that our system planning has got to be done as a system these days, can't be done as a collection of organisations. I just wondered whether there was any push to trying to encourage that, or whether we still remain a bit of an exception to the way we did it here.
You are an exception, Matt, but that's really because of the reasons that you mentioned. With 4 organisations, it was relatively easy for the assessors to look at the. I don't know the detail, but if there were 4 different sets of job descriptions, 4 different appraisal processes, 4 different training and development strategies, doing 4 is not that difficult. If someone was to come to Greater Manchester where there are 11 trusts and an ICB, I think that's a bit too big of an ask. So I'm speaking slightly out of turn here. I don't speak for the Towards Excellence group nationally, but I'm sure that we would look to ways to be as flexible as we could be with where it made sense. And we have to be flexible. So for example, in the Northwest, we recently accredited Mersey Internal Audit Agency. Obviously, some of the criteria don't apply directly to them, but we come to a view and make sure that we're doing the fairest thing we can for the organisations involved.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the point is we try to harmonise those things rather than having 4 individual things. And it also supports a similar approach to risk appetite, which is one of the great differentiators of obviously having gone through the planning round. It's where you have differential risk approaches, you get a sense of lack of equity in terms of the overall the result we get to and what people are pushed to try and stretch towards. So I just commend the approach if it's feasible to do so.
Absolutely, Matt. And in your situation, obviously it worked very well. You've worked in the Northwest. You can imagine the difficulties trying to get MFT and NCA to sign up to the same set of job descriptions and appraisal processes. Daryl, over to you, sir.
So I guess that I could add that certainly within our region, we are encouraging people that are either at level 1 looking to go to level 2 to try and collaborate through systems. That doesn't mean that we're just sort of going to do everything once, but there are opportunities to try and ensure that certain things are done once and we're consistent as we can be. And I think that just helps getting everybody to that consistent level ready for the assessment to take place.
No, absolutely. That does make perfect sense, Daryl. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I did promise you we were going to finish on time, and we're absolutely bang on time. So, Daryl, with no further ado, I shall pass over to you. And you're going to talk, I hope, about the benefits of being involved as an assessor in this whole process.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Yeah, so we might be able to catch up a little bit. I mean, there are a huge amount of benefits from my perspective of getting involved. Firstly, if your organisation is sort of further down the line in terms of its journey, you are picking up hints and tips as you go along that can then support your organisation to get over the line. Yeah, I was assessing whilst I was still trying to work with my organisation to get to level 3. So that's something to bear in mind. Obviously, there's a huge amount of networking. It is a great opportunity. So I've just done an assessment, and we'd have probably struggled a little bit to actually do a face-to-face because we were all over the country, and we were assessing somebody in Northwest London. So yeah, it really depends on who's in the team. I guess the other thing to say about the assessment process, I'm not sure whether it has been said earlier on, but yeah, if it's your first time, then you usually be pitched with an experienced assessor. So again, I wouldn't say I've led on the assessment, but I was part of an assessment. I had 3 new assessors. They thought they were shadowing. I said that they were doing, and I was looking after them. And that's how it worked. I mean, I think that yeah, if you're breaking down the evidence into different sections, and then I think it can cut down on some of the timings that David referred to in terms of how long it takes to prepare. Obviously, if you've got somebody just sort of overseeing the process who will then just sort of make sure that everything is at a standard, at a consistent level, then that helps as well. But again, the first time I tried it, really, we broke down the report into sections, and each person contributed, and then that was my job to actually make it hang together and make it feel like only one person had written it. So I guess if you're a new assessor, then hopefully you'll have somebody with you that will make it helpful and supportive as you go through that first assessment. I mean, the other things is there's so much great stuff going on, and a couple of assessments ago, I've been looking to do some engagement with the rest of the organisation, which we've just been sort of kicking around with timing, but we're going to do it in the summer. And I wanted to refresh our engagement questionnaire. And one of the assessment teams, or one of the people we were assessing, and we started talking about what they'd got. So I asked if I could use it. So they sent it to me, and it was a great baseline. I messed around with it and made it my own, as I would, but it saved me a lot of time. So yeah, if you want to steal with pride, there's loads and loads of opportunities. God, this is going to go really quick because I'm struggling to think about all the other things in the process. But I guess in terms of just jumping through the hoops of going through it, is if it's something that you've not done during your career, then it's going to teach you some good skills. You've got to organize, especially if you're taking the lead and you're working with others. You've got to ensure that that the meetings are set up and that they run to plan. I think one of the things that when David was talking, what I always try and do is get the budget holders to come to the meetings where there are finance staff present, because you get some fantastic feedback, really positive feedback, and I think it's really important that the finance department get to hear that. You do get the odd occasion where you get a bit of challenge as well. Like David says, as long as it's constructive, it is a journey. It is a two-way discussion. And in the last one that we did, the sort of budget managers were really positive about the finance department, but said, we think you can do more. We think you've got the skills to do more. Why can't you do more? And so that was a sort of a little bit of a challenge to them to say, right, okay, it was an ICB, so obviously they're just establishing themselves, but that's something that went into the report about. It's something to look at when the next assessment, for level 3 takes place. That have they done something? Has things moved on? Can you get a bit of feedback on that? And I guess the other thing, which is really important, is that if you're on top of the assessment process, then you're going to be on top of supporting your organisation. So I think I'm about 18 months away from my level 3 re-accreditation, and I know that the standards have moved on since we last did it. I know that, and David made it really clear, I'm going to have to go through all 3 elements of the assessment process to just make sure that we've got those ticks in the box. And one of the things that I've got to be mindful of is I'm quite fortunate that a lot of my time is dedicated to training and development. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it, probably more than a lot of organisations, unless you're David, have at their disposal. So my challenge is to get more people to get involved, so it's not just me driving the process. And if I was an assessor coming to my organisation, that's what I would be looking for. So I think understanding the background of the organisation that you go into is helpful. And again, that just helps you broaden your overall knowledge of the NHS, of the organisations. It's great if you're able to assess within your own region, because that could be helpful in terms of career development along the way. But I would I'd take it. I'm open to sort of doing any kind of organisation, because whilst we are one big family, there are different approaches. But in terms of, if you saw somebody in the far north or the deep south, then you'd pick things up and learn new things. So I think it's just helps with that opportunity to learn and grow. So I'm going to pause there and see whether anybody's got any questions. You can ask me as an assessor, or you can ask me as somebody who gets assessed, whichever way you want to approach it.
Thanks, Daryl. So have colleagues got any questions for, I guess now's the time for any questions for Daryl, myself, for Jane, Sonia, anything at all that you want to pick up from what you've heard from us all across the course of this afternoon's presentations? I'm just going to mention a couple of quick things if I can while you're thinking about that. First of all, just going to the point that Daryl made about having people in the room, and I will mention this organisation. I did an assessment recently for Lewisham and Greenwich Trust down in London, which they were successful, and they deliberately picked a budget holder who they knew would be challenging, and they had their finance team in the room with that person, and it was a really beneficial exercise, because I think it can be really good. And I have to give praise to the budget holder. She was incredibly constructive. She had a lot of criticism, but she put it in a really positive way. And that was a very, very brave thing that I think the organisation did. But actually, it definitely rewards for them. They got a lot from that. I'm not suggesting you should all do that when you do your assessments, but it's something definitely to think about. Then the other thing just to mention, and I forgot to do this at the start, for colleagues on the call from the Northwest, We are different in the Northwest, and if you want to get involved in assessments, then contact myself or Jackie Bowman, and we'll make sure that you are your offer of help is taken up in the Northwest. And our processes for other colleagues, please contact the One NHS Finance team. Becky and colleagues will then make sure that you are given the opportunity to, hopefully before being thrown in the deep end by Darryl, at least shadow one assessment to get an idea of what's going on. So are there any other questions at this point? No. Oh, Sonia, yes, over to you.
It's more of a comment, really. We actually had Jane and Tom, and we had somebody who hadn't done an assessment before, and it was really good her being there. And I think Jane and Tom, I think you guided her, didn't you, in and gave her a little bit of responsibility, not total responsibility, but actually you could see her confidence as well from the beginning to the end of the process of what she thought she could ask us and how she could phrase it. So I think that worked well for us. And David, just to say that I didn't get emotional because I didn't like the process. I got emotional because I was so passionate about it. And it
Sorry if I misrepresented you. I did know that. Yes, yeah, I get that.
and
I
so,
get that.
you know, Darryl's just said, when you listen to people that are saying really lovely things about you and your organisation and your team, that just that's why.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. One last chance if anyone's got any final questions. Great stuff. Okay, so as we agreed, Sonia, if you could send your finance strategy to Becky, if you're happy to do that, and then we can share that with people if they want to have a look at that. I'll and your slides as well, please. I'll send my slides across to Becky as well, and we can share those. One final thing to say, and this goes really to the heart of what we've been talking about, and particularly Darryl's session just now. You'll have my email address. Please do feel free to contact me. I'm sure Jane and Darryl and Sonia would also be happy to have to share any wisdom that we might have accrued between us, or to answer any questions, or just to give you a bit of a helping hand. So please do that. That's what we're here for. That really is the whole point of this process and One NHS Finance as a whole. So thank you for your time. I hope it's been useful. If you're about to do an assessment, good luck, and don't forget we are here to support you. Thank you very much. You've now got 22 minutes of your afternoon back for a cup of tea, so make the most of it, because I'm sure that time is precious. Thanks, folks. See you soon.